I was absolutely a bottleneck and I didn't realize it. There was a ton of stuff to do. So I started supporting a number of teams. I was feeling really good. I was getting a lot of dopamine hits. And then 6 weeks later, I was sitting down with my manager and I was totally expecting him to say, boy, you're killing it, right? He said, Vinay, you're actually diminishing the intelligence on the team. I was like, are we talking about the same thing? Like, what is going on?
So you have this bottleneck test. How do you execute that test?
The first question I often ask is,
Hello, everyone. Welcome to One Idea, the podcast that talks about just one idea, no marketing, no buzzwords, no bullshit. Here we have today Vinay Perneti, VP Eng at Augment Code. He has served at Meta and Pure Storage before. Welcome to One Idea, Vinay.
yeah, great to be here, Suresh.
Perfect. So the first question, your mentor told you that you are becoming the bottleneck of the team.
Yeah.
Right? And how did it go?
I'll maybe rewind back to, I'll tell you a little bit of a story as to how that happened. This was 8 years ago. Pure as a company was growing really fast and I started supporting a number of teams. There was a ton of stuff to do. So my instincts were like, I'm going to work X number of hours more than what I'm doing today. I clearly remember this time, this was February, and I said, I'm going to go into work starting tomorrow, 6:30 a.m. I'm going to stay all the way till as long as I need. In some cases, I was there till 8 p.m. I was feeling really good. I was feeling like, oh man, I was getting a lot of dopamine hits. Like, oh wow, look at all these things. I'm answering all these questions. I'm able to get all of this done. And then 6 weeks later, I was sitting down with my manager for a one-on-one, and I was like, hey, how am I doing? Give me feedback. And I was totally expecting him to say, boy, you're killing it, right? I love this manager of mine, and he said, Vinay, you're actually diminishing the intelligence on the team, right? I was like, are we talking about the same thing? Like, what is going on? It took me a while to because it was so not the type of the message I was expecting to hear. This is someone I trusted a lot. This is a manager I had for almost 6 years. So that's the only thing that kept me in the conversation, because the easiest thing for me to do was, I'm not being recognized. I'm out of here, right? That's when my mentor manager introduced me to this concept of multipliers. He was talking about how leaders unintentionally become the bottleneck. Like, there was a 9-month journey ahead of me when that happened to get to really internalize what that meant.
Now, I have a question around the same thing, right? So that's for the first level or a second level manager, right? So being not in the critical path is not fun for an IC. Mm-hmm. And I'm a strong believer, an IC, a good IC is the best manager too. Mm-hmm. So that's what I believe in. But taking yourself off of the critical path sounds a little unsafe, uncomfortable for the ICs, right? How do you manage it? How do you mentor your team to really take it and run with it?
So when I think about typically what happens, especially in the Valley, is you have a strong technical person that can solve really hard problems and then say, hey, I want you to be the tech lead, because that's the person that you can depend on, right? Fast forward a couple of months, they become the manager. Almost always, none of them have any kind of management training. They don't know what it means to be a good manager. They don't know what the role of a manager is. That's all brand new. If you're lucky, you have a manager that can coach you through it. But more often than not, they are very busy, right? The default mode of operation is, I was being recognized by everybody around me for solving hard problems. I want to continue doing that. Here are the two outcomes that happened. I learned the hard way. The team would continue to come to me to solve all the hard technical problems. Fast forward 6 months, I thought I was killing it. The team was happy, at least from my perspective. A new role opened up, or new opportunity came up. And I went to my manager and said, why aren't you considering me for that, right? And this time, this manager said, but your team needs you. If you haven't developed the capacity on the team to operate without you, I cannot take you out of there, right? And that was the first hard lesson for me, saying a big important job of a manager is to build the capacity within the team, right? Sheryl Sandberg has this amazing quote: people can do more in your presence, but more importantly, the impact lasts in your absence, right? When you're not there, how is your team able to push forward on the impact, right? I think that to me was the first learning, saying, okay, one of my big roles is to build capacity in the team.
So let's assume we established this, right? How do we test that we have established this?
I think the test is actually simpler than that. The thing I often reflect on, and I ask my team, the leaders especially, is, how overwhelmed do you feel in the role that you're currently working in, right? If the answer is no, then the next question is, how much impact is your team landing? If your team is landing amazing impact and you're not feeling overwhelmed, you've figured something out. If your team is not landing impact, or the thoughts that are coming in your mind are along the lines of, I wish my team could step up more. That's when I would say is time to pause and reflect. How much of it is them and how much of it is you that's unintentionally contributing to that?
Before you started implementing this framework, the activity from your side being in that critical path, being in that like decision making in that room, versus after you implemented this framework, what was the response from the team and response from yourself, right? How did that happen?
Night and day. I mean, this is not something that happens overnight, right? There was a period in my career where I was absolutely a bottleneck and I didn't realize it. And this was when I hired a coach, and then I was working with the coach. And over a period of like 3 to 4 months, there was some pretty hard reflective moments and like trying to really hone in on what exactly I need to be doing to really have the impact. A couple of things start happening. One of the questions I often ask is, as a leader, when you're supporting your team and your direct reports come to you, what kind of questions are they coming to you with? Are they coming to you with questions expecting answers from you? Or are they coming to you with questions to clarify their own thinking and then going back to solve the problem, right? What I started doing after this, this coaching, typically my mode of engagement today would be, okay, what do you think we should do? What context can I give you to help you come to a set of options? Then they're not as paralyzed anymore. Oh, you're not asking me to make a final decision. Yeah, let me give you these 2 options. What I'm doing here, right? We are working on the problem, but we're working on the problem together, where I'm engaging the other person a lot more. I'm sort of borrowing their thinking a lot more than thinking for them, right?
Got it.
And something amazing started happening, right? Like one of the things I noticed is people started getting more confident in themselves. There's another mentor of mine that would, define confidence as, confidence is not knowing everything, right? Confidence is self-trust. And how do you build self-trust? By sort of solving problems. When you're in a new role, you don't trust yourself on day one. You trust yourself saying, wait, this thing happened, I solved it, and I solved it myself. Oh, therefore, that must mean I can solve more hard problems. That turns into ownership. That turns into feeling empowered, right? You have this snowball effect where your team starts getting supercharged, right? So that's sort of what I observed. Nothing changed, by the way, like in the sense that the people didn't change. Same environment, same people, I changed.
Generally, when you implement this framework, outcome is awesome. Do you see a lot of resistance in that process for leaders? Is it okay, or do they feel unsafe or uncomfortable taking them off of that path, right? So now my team decides, not me.
It is not a straightforward journey, I think. There's a lot of nuance here, and that's why I think it takes time. I had to confront this hard moment in my own career. I had to have this highly trusted leader that I was working with to show me the mirror.
I see.
And then I worked with a coach repeatedly. I would take specific situations with them and I'd tell them, hey, the business needs me to solve this problem now. What do you mean I cannot give them the solution? Until you it clicks into you, no, there's another way of doing it. And it does not have to take a ton of time.
Will the team or your reportees feel that, now I'm not part of this decision making. Yes, I'm helping the team get to a point where they can run by themselves. Does it also mean that now I'm less important?
You use the word important, right? I think that's actually core of the challenge when somebody is in this position. So let's take the true transitions that I often see. ICs becoming managers and managers becoming manager of managers. When ICs are becoming managers, often they were the most important person on the team.
Correct.
Right? Because all the problems came to them. They were fantastic at solving them. They've now become the manager. I actually think they have to get comfortable with the fact that they are not the most important person.
Exactly.
Right?
Taking the back seat comfortably.
And that's not easy, right?
Yep.
Because often people are like, am I being effective? How am I being effective? And this is where I think having a coach or having a manager that's very supportive is incredibly valuable, because I think you have to make this mental shift that as a manager, your effectiveness is directly proportional to the effectiveness of the team. If your team is producing amazing results, you're doing the job.
Great. Now, from an application standpoint, right, does it apply to just engineering teams or sales teams? In your mind, where is it applicable?
To me, actually, this applies to all leaders at all levels. The 2 books I'd recommend is Multipliers by Liz Wiseman, and there's another book called Leadership Pipeline by Ram Charan. The thing that leaders need to recognize, regardless of engineering, sales, whatever it might be, when you're going from one role to another, you have to pause and ask, what problems should I continue solving that I was solving before? And what problems should I like have my team go solve? What new problems do I have to be solving that I don't even know about, right? Like that's where having mentors like, hey, I took on this new role. Help me see the forest for the trees. Like what are some interesting things I need to be solving? Because it's more of a mode of operation and thinking. It's less about something that's domain specific, in my view.
Now, you have scaled teams from 35 to 90 in no time, right? No time.
Yeah.
Right. What if you had stayed exactly the same way? So you were Vinay before.
Yeah.
And now you're Vinay after. So
Yeah.
what is Vinay before was running the team?
I sort of lived through that, right? I think the Vinay before that was running through the team was one where I was definitely feeling a lot more overwhelmed. And I kept thinking that my team's not stepping up. I kept thinking, oh man, like why aren't people taking more ownership? And when you start operating in a mode where you're trying to as much, there's not a thing where you can be perfect at, but the more you try to not be the bottleneck means that the more the team's feeling empowered and the more as a unit, as a system, you're moving much faster, right? Like that's sort of the outcome there. For teams that are operating in fast moving environments, I would say this is even more important. I'm glad to have made all those mistakes. Like I often tell folks that, whenever you make a mistake, yes, it feels very bad in the moment, but if you turn it into a learning moment, right, you're a much better person going forward. So when I look back at all the career mistakes I've made, I'm super grateful for them, right? Because the person I am today is because of all the mistakes I've made before.
Now, going back to the AI assistant world, right? So this probably is the second hottest topic in the world, if I look at it, right? Except for there are large players in there, right? And you are clearly winning. Clearly, your model worked in Facebook, and it is working here too.
Yeah.
Right? So what is the thing that's helping you win here and here? And especially here where most of us are now.
If you're talking about this style of leadership approach, how does it translate across different companies, right? I think that's a great question. When things are not intense, when things are like, somewhat slow paced, a lot of the leadership styles can just get by, right? You can't actually separate out the difference. When things feel very intense, I think that's where the difference becomes very stark, right? I often joke whenever I do sell calls to candidates, I often tell them, I've been at Augment for a year and a half, but that feels like 10 years because the pace of change is incredibly high, right? Every week, the world looks different. Sam Altman was interviewing Johnny Ive, and Sam asks Johnny, what's one of the hardest things that you're sort of navigating in this current space? And Johnny is like, the pace of change. You want to remove as many bottlenecks as possible in your system. I think about engineering organization as a system. Bottlenecks happen in code. Bottlenecks happen with people and interactions, right? So at Augment, like one thing I've done very intentionally is as we've grown rapidly, we've been very intentional about building this connective tissue. When folks feel connected, they're much more likely to take a generous interpretation of the situation as opposed to, oh, are you trying to get ahead of this career? And like, am I going to fall behind? Versus, hey, we're all on the same team and the problem's on the other side.
Let's solve it together.
Let's all agree like which is the most hardest problem and let's do it together. That's sort of how we've embraced this, I would say.
So it's almost like a litmus test of if your framework is now working or not, right?
Yeah.
So if they are coming back to you, there is some more.
Yeah. And when they do come back, I ask them, what's holding you back from solving this yourself, right? And now they sort of like kind of see this. They're like, oh, I guess why should I go to Vinay? Because he's going to send me back anyway. Why don't I just solve it myself?
Now, what do I do if I have this framework? As a manager, my task is all done, right? Teams are solving it. How do I find more or relevant work for me to stay relevant?
I think a healthy system is folks in the team have a clear sense of where we are going together. What is my role in helping us get there? And are people solving the right problems at the right level? When that's not happening, things start getting bottlenecking.
Yep.
Let's make it concrete, right? Let's pick two transitions. An EM that is supporting a team directly. In a fast-moving space, the fundamental thing for that EM to do is my team working on the most impactful problems? And that might seem like, shouldn't every EM be asking this? But imagine in a world where every week the world is different, right? That's not a very simple question to answer because you have to be plugged into what's going on externally around your team and then like have the humility to say, say, hey, we are this far along on this journey, but guess what? It actually doesn't matter anymore because the world around us completely changed. So let's actually go make this hard call and then pivot, right? If as an EM, you're not plugged into what's going on around you, guess what's going to happen? You're going to miss that. You're focused on solving a hard technical problem, which is important, right? But you're solving the wrong problem. Like when I think about overall outcomes, that's on the EM, like the first level EM problem, right? Now let's take the same thing can be applied to a manager of managers. Now let's say you're a manager of manager. One of your EM says, oh, I have this person on my team. For some reason, they're not clicking and they're not working well. Like, fantastic. I know how to solve the problem. Let me solve it for you. Let me go do one-on-ones. It's like, what you're not doing is, are we the best in class in this environment right now, right? You're not looking at the system at a bigger level, and instead you're solving a very specific problem. And again, as a collective unit, you're not having the same level of impact. So to me, that's where the rubber meets the road.
So you have this bottleneck test. Now, how do you execute that test? What are the questions that you would ask?
These are more reflective questions than anything else, right? So the central theme of this is, are you solving the right problems? The first question I often ask is, when we kind of touched on it, but when folks come to me, are they coming seeking answers or are they coming for me to be a thought partner? Question number one. The second question is, are they coming to me for approval? Oh, we solved this problem and we're about to ship this. Hey, Vinay, can we ship this? Wait, why do you feel like you need to come to me to know whether you can ship this or not? Like, do we not have a shared understanding of what good looks like? Let's sit down and talk about what good looks like, right? So that's sort of empowering the team again.
Nice.
The third one, this is an actually interesting one. Like, when I have some time, what do I gravitate towards? I think is another very interesting one for me, right? As a first-line manager, let's say I have some time. Am I going and solving a very hard problem that the team is, like a technical problem? Or am I looking at like cross-team interactions, like the team capacity, like, hey, why is this thing taking much longer? Like, am I missing a specialist on the team? Here is another very interesting diagnostic test. If a team sized a problem a certain way, but then they keep like finding out that like, oh, this is bigger than what we thought. That's often like an indication for me saying like, maybe a senior tech lead is missing on the team, because people that have seen around corners often anticipate a whole bunch of things and they're able to bring all of that into how they think about solving the problem, right? Like when somebody's solving it for the first time, they keep discovering a lot of unknowns. Like one of my mentors used to say, seeing around corners is the phrase that he used, right? So as an EM, when I have some time on my hands, am I gravitating to like, oh yeah, let me just solve this hard technical problem? Or am I saying, why is this taking this long? Can I diagnose my team health and then say, hey, I'm missing a core skill here. I'm going to have to go work with recruiting to go like make that hire, right? So the three questions boil down to, what is my ratio of giving answers to asking questions? The second one is, how often are people coming to me for approval? What am I doing with my free time?
When you encounter a problem, there are multiple ways to solve this. Now, what is the trigger where you say, you know what, now done, I'm going to go in, right? So is there such a time?
Here is, I think, how I've now come to think about it. There's this perception that if you're embracing this approach, you're passive. And in fact, that's actually not true at all. Let's just take this example where a manager comes in and says, hey, Vinay, we heard from this customer, they brought in new requirements and they want this in 2 weeks. What do you think we should do? Here's a wrong way to do it. Hey, why don't you think about it and then come back to me? And then you leave it there. And that person, you didn't give them any timelines. They sort of go away. They forgot about it. The sales team then now comes and says, guys, I don't have an answer. What the hell's going on, right? A better way to do this is, hey, why don't you think about this and let's meet this afternoon. I want you to come back with a proposal for what you think needs to happen. Let's meet this afternoon. Hey, here are some options. Hey, I don't think you're taking this additional context into account. Can you take this into account? Can we circle back before the end of the day? So what you're doing is you're helping them clarify their thinking. And guess what's going to happen the next time the same manager runs into the same situation? They would have short-circuited the 3 steps that you went through. And they come to you with like, hey, here are the options. What do you think? In fact, even better, here are the options. I'm thinking A. Is there any context that I'm missing? Like, no, that's fantastic. Go, right? In this process, you actually don't have to become soft, if you will, right? You're actually moving really quickly with the right level of context, and you're building the confidence and self-trust of the person that's solving these problems.
This is not a softer, polished way of managing team. This is probably the right way where everybody is empowered. Right? So that's how one should look at it.
Yeah. An element here is I go back to connection, right? Like the folks should feel trusted. Folks should feel like they're invested in. So as a leader, you have to lead with that. Like you have to trust your team and you have to build the connection with the team. And you ask these hard questions and trust that they have the capacity to go handle them, right? That's sort of how I look at it.
So let's say there is a technical problem, like a code issue, right? So let's forget about the P-team interactions and everything. And you are the expert there. In that case, would you zoom in and help, or would you still step back and give it some more time?
This framework makes it sound like if damned if you do, damned if you don't. There's always going to be situations, time is incredibly critical. Let's say the whole site is down. If you think you're the best person to solve the problem to go get us out of that situation, and it is a super critical situation and a lot of impact, do it. But there's a nuance of how you do it. Be very intentional that you're doing it as an exception, right? You do it by saying, hey, I recognize that we are in this massive SEV. I would like to jump in to help here, right? It's a much more intentional, explicit thing as opposed to, I'm just going to do it. I think that's the nuance, I would say, that I think worth taking. And then also reminder for yourself saying the next time the same thing happens that it's not a SEV one, it's like, okay, go back to your, like the new muscle that you're trying to build. So you do want to be flexible. I don't think this is a rigid system where you ignore reality. I think you sort of look at the circumstances.
Were you faced with any pushback in deploying this new model?
I would say it's more of a mindset than like a deployment of a model, how I would think about it. The biggest change that my team saw in me, right, is they actually saw me a lot more approachable. Like in the past, I think I was kind of maybe unintentionally giving that like, hey, I'm kind of annoyed that you're not able to solve this on your own, right? Whereas now I'm like, hey, I trust that you can solve it. Let me give the problem back to you, right? So I think that's a shift that people see. The ideas are borrowed from Multipliers Leadership from Liz Wiseman.
Book, yes.
And then the leadership pipeline. It's sort of like merging a bunch of these concepts together is sort of how I think about it.
There is a lot of competition. As I said, that when it comes to competition for a startup, that's really the time of test, right? Everybody's tested. It's rolling in the mud. Now, eng teams generally I've seen, they like solving problems, but they are not always the best to observe or watch out for outcomes and lack of outcomes. And in a startup, you would want your team to quickly pick it and say, you know what? Yeah, maybe it's not the right thing. Just pivot, right? Go in a different direction. How do you implement that?
So a couple of things we have done, I would say, to help with that. A lot of this is learning from my time at Meta. Meta as a company, I think, is very much about leaning into change internally as a culture. Like it's all about like, are you very plugged into what's the most impactful thing to be doing and how do you orient towards impact? At Augment, to me, it comes down to shared context, right? I am a huge believer that people make the right decisions if they have the right context. And often what happens, I think leaders have a certain amount of context and they're wondering, why is the person on the team not making the decision, but they don't recognize that the person on the team doesn't have that context. So one of the things we have done at Augment is every week, we have an all company, all hands. And it's 1 hour. And then we actually talk about what's happening in the business, what's happening in the industry, how are we as a leadership team thinking about where we stand today, and very transparently walk with the whole team. Where do you think we are? Where are the challenges? How are we thinking about tackling them? So I think that is to me, that is a critical part of like, now everybody has the same context, right? So that when I have a one-on-one, it's no longer I'm bringing some context into that. Again, it goes back to the coaching side. Like, hey, how are you thinking about your space given the shared context that we all have? And then we can have a much more productive conversation about like, should we pivot now? Should we go to something different? Those conversations become much, much more straightforward.
What is their first move if they see that this is a bottleneck?
I think the first move I would say is congratulations, because the first step to change is awareness, right? Which is the hardest step in my view. If you're a bottleneck, more often than not, you don't think of like the role that you're playing to be that bottleneck. More often you think it's everybody else's problem. I think that's one. So if you find yourself that, hey, there's something here. I listened to this podcast. There's something here for me to go deeper on. There's another fun exercise that my coach made me do when I was going through this journey is he said, for an entire week, I can only ask questions.
Wow.
No answers. Like if somebody comes to you for an entire week, only ask questions. And boy, that was hard.
That is hard.
That was extreme, right? And that was like a very big learning for me, right? So if you want to wake up Monday morning, if you're really feeling up to it, take on the challenge and then see how far it gets you.
A question that's asked in any conference today, any meeting today, right? More than one person in a coffee table, ask this question, right?
Yeah.
It's AI, what do I do? Especially for Eng leaders. Tell
Yeah,
us.
there was an article that I was reading about different uses of AI, and they were finding that folks were using it as just question and answers. I think there's another pattern that resonates with me a lot is leveraging LLMs as thought partners. That I think is often underused, and there's a lot there, right?
Give me an example.
Yeah, let's say as a leader, you ask me Monday morning, you show up, you heard this podcast, but you have a lot of questions and you don't know where to start, and you don't have the budget to go hire a coach and then spend 3 months with that coach, right? The first thing is imagine your LLM is your coach, and then you would go in and then you can say something like, hey, I heard about this bottleneck test in this podcast. I'm wondering if I'm a bottleneck. The speakers talked about multipliers. The speakers talked about leadership pipeline. Can you help me with this? And then off you go. I think often people underappreciate like what LLMs are able to do. If you think about neural networks, right? So they have these in this multidimensional space. When you give it all these keywords, you say leadership pipeline, multipliers, and bottleneck test. LLMs are actually fantastic at trying to find the intersection of all these things.
Yep.
And then in a very beautiful way, you can actually bring your context into that situation and then like ideate really quickly on, oh, okay, one of my ICs came and said this, and like I responded this way. Can you critique this from that lens? And you'd be amazed by how much progress it can make. If you're looking for LLM to have the right answers, you're thinking about this the wrong way, right? What it can help you is broaden your horizon, and it'll actually help you clarify your own thinking. Something that I've done, Eng leader or not, like if there's a lot of thoughts that are stuck in my head, I just literally do a brain dump, and then they're able to cluster things. And when you reread that, you have a lot more clarity. Oh, these are the things I'm struggling with. I'm much better in position to go tackle those. Going back to your question, I think the obvious answer is I think code is very, very accessible for you anymore. You don't have to hold back. At Augment, we focus a lot on code base understanding with large code bases. So a lot of the leaders I've seen use Augment to understand what's going on in their code.
One concern that I've heard from multiple people, multiple engineers especially, is yes, you could deploy LLMs/coding assistants for. Now the problem is if there's a production issue, and now there is some code that you've generated.
Yeah.
You may not have full control over or understanding of what exactly it's doing. How do you mitigate that risk?
Great question. I mean, this comes up a lot. I mean, Augment is very much focused on being the AI platform for professional software teams, right? So this is something that we think about a lot. I think a lot of the applications that you hear for LLMs today is predominantly vibe coding, prototyping, right? When I think about in the context of professional software teams, the code is owned by the engineers. LLMs is just a tool to help you get there, right? That's sort of how to think about it. In the context that you're describing, when you're using an LLM to produce something, the end ownership lies with the human. So there's got to be someone that's code reviewing and sending it out there, right? I think that's one thing. The second thing is use the tools that can produce code that are much more closer to your existing code base. So that's sort of how I think about it.
What else for an engineer is this applicable?
At Augment, we think about the foundation models are all about intelligence. And the other thing you need is context. So you need context and intelligence combined to produce outcomes, right?
Yep.
So imagine you have access to this world knowledge that's an LLM. So I was coming to the podcast. One of the things I was curious about is like, oh, let me take a look at what the intersection of these two would look like. And I asked LLM to say, hey, take concepts from multipliers, take concepts from a leadership pipeline. If I were to do an assessment for my own org as to how we are doing, what would that look like? And it was a fun experiment just to sort of see like, what are some of like how it interweaves all of that. The more you can throw yourself into figuring out experimentation mindset, I think is super important. When you think of what role as a leader do you need to be playing, I think is creating that space and safety.
I see.
For people to try these things, right? Because if they don't feel the space or the safety, then you may not be getting the outcomes. And in the world where we are heading, you want your team to be leaning on these as much as possible to figure out what unlocks for them.
Now, for you can guide all of us to like that 90% productivity with your understanding of how an AI assistant should be used starting day one.
Yeah.
And there are companies that are trying to do it.
Yeah.
For them to take the first step, what would be your playbook there, right? Who should they talk to? How should they look at this whole problem statement?
As a team, if you haven't tried an AI coding assistant, I would say it's high time to actually try it. Be willing to retry, I think is another one that I would say. Like this space is changing so fast. So I would say first trying that out, I think is the one thing. The second thing is, if you think about the entire software development lifecycle, I'm specifically talking about engineering as an example, right? There are some things that engineers do today that they are super excited by. There are some things that engineers do today that's a draining activity for them. What does that shift need to look like? I think thinking about LLMs in that context, I think is very interesting. So this experimentation mindset, willing to retry, is sort of how I would encourage folks to be thinking about.
Perfect. So thank you so much for being here, Vinay. It was a super fun conversation.
Super glad to be on the podcast, and yeah, thanks for having me.